This is Back to Back.
Yo, what's up, back-to-backers? This is Willy Joy. Welcome to the show. This is Back to Back. This is my podcast. So, how we doing, guys? Y'all feeling all right out there? Dance music had kind of a crazy week. A lot happened. And I have some thoughts on it that I want to share, but before any of that, I'm so excited for this one. My guest on the show today is Anna Lunoe. I've been trying to link up with Anna to do this show for a long time, and man, this is one of my favorite conversations I've had on this show, maybe ever. It's a good one. Anna just dropped her new single called Blaze of Glory last Friday. It's out right now on every platform. It sits right in that uncategorizable category that I think she does so well. You know, elements of dance music, pop music, great songwriting. And if you don't already know, Anna also runs one of the best radio stations on Beats One Radio, Apple Radio. It's called Hyperhouse. It's on Friday nights. And the link to all of her new music, the radio show, her tour dates, all of that is going to be in the description of this episode. So, before we get into that conversation with Anna, I just want to say a couple words about all the craziness that went down this week. Basically, if you didn't hear about it, Datsik was accused of sexual abuse, multiple allegations from multiple women, in some really bad situations. It all sounds really bad. And the reaction was very, very fast. He's stepped back from everything he's doing. Basically, it's all shut down. And that's good. I think all of that is happening as it should. Anytime these allegations come up, they have to be taken seriously. But I don't just want to talk about him, because I think really what this exposed is a much bigger issue that's endemic in the dance music culture right now, and it's something that needs to be talked about. The conversations I've been having with a lot of my friends, a lot of the people I work with, a lot of people I know in the industry, a really common theme is someone saying, I'm actually surprised that it took this long for these kind of allegations to hit our scene. And the reason for that is that if you've worked in this industry long enough, if you've been backstage, been in enough green rooms around the country, most people will witness some kind of bad behavior. Now, I want to be clear, I've never seen sexual assault happen in a club from anybody. If I ever saw something, of course you would shut it down immediately. But I think what's going on here is more insidious than that. It's an overall culture that's allowing these assaults to happen and kind of enabling them. So then the question becomes, why aren't more men speaking out about this? Why isn't this causing a major sea change? You know, why aren't we collectively raising up against this kind of behavior and making safer spaces and trying to welcome everybody into this community? Because the roots of dance music are about inclusivity, and they are about a place for outsiders to go and feel safe. And I think the reason right now why more people aren't speaking up can be chalked up to a couple things. And I'm going to speak from personal experience here. I think looking back, it's very easy to feel like I've enabled that kind of culture, the culture we don't want. And I think I've enabled it by inaction, because there's definitely been times where I've been backstage on a tour bus and I've seen men talk to women in disrespectful ways. You know, just certain actions, feeling entitled to so-called groupie behavior, very minor. Again, I've never witnessed anything even close to what I would call an assault. But all those minor actions really do build this much larger culture where women feel unsafe. So I think a lot of men are afraid to speak up right now because either they've seen something in the past or been in a questionable situation in the past, And, maybe they feel guilty about not saying anything at the time. Maybe they're worried about being called a hypocrite if they do speak up now. And maybe even the most common answer is that a lot of men, I think, aren't really aware of the problem. When Datsik put out his initial apology, it was not a good apology. People reacted to it really badly because of the sort of clueless tone that it took. But I didn't read it as him disregarding these allegations. I just read it as a statement of somebody who's kind of been living in their own bubble for so long. They're maybe not aware of what's happening culturally in our country, in our society right now. And I think a lot of musicians are in that boat because the music scene is a place where you can be more free. That's what attracted a lot of us in the first place. You can be weird. You can do what you want. You don't have to conform to society's rules. It's a place for outsiders. But then the problem becomes that we're finding that a lot of the same problems from the quote-unquote normal world have followed us here too. And that because we haven't dealt with them for so long, they've actually gotten kind of bad. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but I just wanted to take this time to personally say I'm making a pledge to try to do better. The next time I personally see somebody treating a woman like shit in the green room, being a dick, it's those little comments that are easily laughed off. I'm going to try my best not to laugh it off anymore. And I hope people listening out there can do the same thing because it really is going to take all of us to fix our community and to make this a safer, more fun, just generally better community for ourselves. So that's it. Sorry I had to get a little heavy on you guys. I just really wanted to get that off my chest. And if you guys have any thoughts about this, I'd love to hear from you. If you've had any experiences with this in your life, or if you just have some thoughts, if you even disagree with me completely, that's cool. I'd love to talk to you guys. I'd love to read some of your emails on the air and really keep this conversation going. So please email me at backtobackpod@gmail.com and let's talk about this. I think this is something we all just need to have more conversations about. If you don't want me to read something on the air, if you just want to talk privately, that's fine too. I think out of all of the craziness, out of all the negativity that happened in the last week, if we work together, we can turn it into something positive in the end. So, moving on, if you want to hear any of the music that's mentioned on today's show or any of the shows in the past, you need to be following the new Back to Bangers Spotify playlist. This is a playlist that I make personally on Spotify every week. I update it every week with all the music we talk about in this episode, all the music from my guest, from myself, anything that's related to what we're talking about. It's really cool. Go and subscribe to the playlist right now. The link for it is also in the description of this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to this show. Leave us a rating and a review. And if you have 5 seconds, tell a friend about us. Spread the word a little bit. That really does help. We operate on word of mouth. All of you guys have helped build this show to what it is so far. And we have some big ideas to keep growing it with your help. So, for today's conversation with Anna Lunoe, we met up bright and early in the morning, 9 a.m., and I wasn't kidding earlier that this really is one of my favorite conversations I've had on here. Anna's an incredible talent. She has a fascinating story. And to top it all off, her mom was there while we were recording, which was a really fun extra thing. Don't forget that Anna's new single, Blaze of Glory, is out right now. She's starting her new Vegas residency. And as always, she's going to be on the road a lot this year. Let's get into it right now. This is me and Anna Lunoe, back to back. Let's go.
It's before 10 a.m.
Yeah.
This is pretty amazing.
I know. This is incredible. This is actually, You win the award because this is the
Earliest
one I've recorded, which is good. You narrowly beat out Diplo.
Sucked in, Diplo. Finally, I beat him at something.
Yeah, I know. There's got to be one thing, right? I have a chess game online with him that we play almost every day. And I beat him most of the time.
Oh, that must feel good.
It's great. It's great mainly because he gets so angry. He's like the most competitive person I've ever met.
He's such an interesting character to me that he would be traveling. He never sleeps, right? He travels around. But he likes every Instagram post on Instagram, I think. And I now find out that he's playing you on chess. And also, if I ever DM him, he replies.
Right.
How does he manage to control his life on such a micro level when at such a macro level he's completely wilding?
I have no idea. I wonder it all the time. I think some people are genetically built to be able to kind of just deal with no sleep better. I mean, because I've known other people like that. But for him, I don't know what it is. I think there is that competitive drive. I think that's a big part of it. And I think after a while, I don't know, I think you just get addicted to sort of the
pace.
Yeah, the pace of it. That's exactly right.
I think we should spend this entire podcast just dissecting Diplo's psyche.
That's a great...
I would find that way more interesting than anything I've got to say about myself.
Well, but you actually have kind of a long history with him, right? You've known him for a long time.
I have actually, yeah. I think the first time I met him was 2007.
Right.
Or maybe it was 2008, but it's about over 10 years. Yeah, it was interesting actually. I mean, he used to come to Australia and we actually threw a lot of his first parties in Australia with my crew. So like in Sydney, our crew was sort of championing what Diplo and A-Track and like all the Hollaboy, all that stuff. We were sort of championing that in Sydney and throwing all the parties for everyone who came through Sydney. So that's really how I really got into dance music was through that channel.
Right.
So yeah, it has been a really long time. Like my first big gigs was supporting MIA and then I supported Diplo with the girls. So I used to DJ with Nina Las Vegas and this other girl called Bad Ezzy. We DJ'd as a trio called Hoops and we threw these Hoops parties and we got all these artists to play and like...
I remember that actually, yeah.
We brought out Rai Rai and DJ Ez and like South Ruckus crew and Diplo and like we'd throw all these crazy parties. It was really fun.
What were the parties like back in those days? Was it in Australia? Was it a big scene? Was it kind of just growing at the time?
It was growing.
10 years ago.
Yeah, it was growing. I mean, it was really wild. We'd throw, at the parties we'd throw, we'd get like 300 or 400 people through the night. And, we were babies, so we were just like, oh my God.
Everything's exciting.
200 people came through the party. What? That's insane, And it was like a very innocent time pre-internet.
Yeah.
It wasn't pre-internet, obviously, but it was like pre-Instagram, Facebook. Oh, no, Facebook was around.
Yeah, but it was kind of different. I mean, we're in a new age of social media now.
It was much more innocent and just the discovery process was just so exciting.
Right. And everything was more regional too, right? We weren't quite as connected. We didn't know what everyone was doing every second of the day.
Totally.
And so I can only imagine in Australia because you guys are kind of far away.
Oh my gosh,
there, but.
Totally. We were just obsessed with the anticipation to see what a DJ from overseas would play was enormous because you didn't have 1001tracklist.com to tell you exactly what Diplo played last night in fucking South Carolina. You literally had no idea. So when someone turned up, it was like, oh my gosh, like what are they going to play? What are they going to do? They played this song. I played that song too. We both found the same song on palmsoutsounds.com.
Shout out to all the blogs.
Oh
man.
Yeah, man. I shout them out all
blogs.
the time. Every now and then I give a shout out to, what were they called? Those guys that did those, all those mashups.
There were so many. There was Disco Bell. There was Gotta Dance Dirty.
Yeah.
There was...
there were so many.
Let's just list blogs. That's a good podcast.
And all the people who did not grow up in that era are like, these old bitches, can they shut up?
That's more or less you just described what this podcast
is. Do you need me to write your bio, Willy?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. I'm on it.
Were you born in Sydney?
Yeah.
What was growing up there like? Because I've only visited there as an adult, and it kind of became one of my favorite places to go. But I have no concept. It seemed like a beautiful city. I mean, what was it like growing up there? Early impressions.
It is and was a very, very innocent and beautiful place to grow up. I mean, I can only speak from my experience, obviously, but it had an innocence about it, you know? Like Australia in the 80s, when I was born, is like so chill. It's like the chillest place. When we have this show called Home and Away, and when I watch the episodes from the early 90s and, it's like their accents are really Australian. They're like, oh, can't wait. That's going to be great. Like so innocent. So it's like we've changed a lot with the international kind of impulse of like getting American television, travel being so cheap, us all growing up on Keeping Up with the Kardashians or whatever, just like growing up with so much more American TV shows and everything. All our accents have changed as well.
What was your exposure to American culture
Okay,
as a kid?
so we had Full House, we had Melrose Place, we had Beverly Hills 90210. We had like all these shows that we all watched religiously. I actually, when I was a little kid, my favorite show was Full House. And the first time I went to America, my first stop was San Francisco. And I was like, I'm going to meet like, da-da-da. And I'm like a kid, I'm like 18 or 19. I think I had a fake ID, but I was out and like I saw Bob Saget on my first night out in America. And I literally like ran up to him. I was with a friend. I was like, excuse me, wait 1 second. And I ran up to him and I got a photo. I've still got it.
That's amazing.
And he was like talking to these two hot girls and he was like, excuse me, wait 1 second. The show was huge in Australia. And like got a photo taken with me. And I was like, Bob, you pimp. I could even tell. I was like, oh wow, he totally just like, he's a smooth guy.
Yeah. This may not be the first time he's met an Australian fan.
I'm one of many, apparently. I'm just a notch in his belt. But we grew up with all the sitcoms. So the comedy stuff, I just thought America was like, everything just looked like TV. And the first time I went to LA, I literally just walked down Santa Monica Pier and I just was like, this is everything I've ever dreamed about. Every movie I've ever seen. Every time I saw Rodeo Drive or it's that kind of thing. It sounds corny now, especially because I live here. But I honestly, it blew my mind driving around Los Angeles and seeing the palm trees. And just like,
it. Even for me, I mean, I'm a Midwest boy, born
and
raised.
So you kind of get that.
Yeah. I mean, the first time I went to California, the first time I saw the palm trees, even now in San Diego, there's a lot of stuff that only existed in movies for me before now. There's this surf and skate culture and all the beach lifestyle. It's not something I ever knew was a real thing. I thought it was just a movie thing.
Yeah. I know, it blows your mind like, that anything could be that perfect.
Right.
Like that any of the, I mean, I know that nothing's perfect and I know that there's dark sides to everything. But when you're young and you're delivered these perfect pieces of art, that like these perfect TV shows that show these worlds.
Right.
Even my mum was saying it because we're down in San Diego and she's saying that like the first time she came to America when she was 20 years old, and she came to San Diego and she saw the bathrooms and she's like, they all looked like Sandra Dee from Greek. You know what I mean?
Right.
She's like, every Australian generation has their like picture of America and their generational picture of America and they come here and they experience it for the first time. But going back to your question, growing up in Australia in the 80s and the 90s and, the early is like very sweet, very like beach culture. We didn't have a lot in the way of dance music culture at all. I actually we had this TV show called Rage, which was music video clips.
Oh, yeah.
And I was the youngest of 4 kids. My brothers and sisters are a lot older than me. I was very much the token accidental add-on, which they tell me. They're like, you're lucky you're even born. We didn't even want another kid. You're an accident.
Thanks, Mom.
Now you're Dad's favorite. That's what she says. I'm like, Mom, you can't say any of that stuff. That's all so bad.
That's incredible. I do aspire to be at the age where you just don't care
Oh,
anymore,
yeah.
though.
Yeah, she doesn't care.
Great.
She does whatever she wants. It's petrifying. Growing up with the younger brothers and sisters, I was pretty much allowed to do whatever I wanted. I was very unpoliced. I was allowed I used to go to the beach every day on my own after school and fish. I was a huge fisherman.
Really?
I'd sit there with all the old Italian men at the wharf and we'd catch fish all afternoon in my school uniform.
What age is this?
When I was like 9 to 12.
That's amazing.
I loved it. I was massive into fishing.
Wow.
and climbing trees. And like I was just very, like I had this route that I would do around the island, and I would time myself on how quick I could get around the island on the rocks. You know, I was just a kid, and I did that all day. Like all afternoon I would do these physical challenges, and like I had this whole crew down at the beach that we'd hang out with. But at night, when I couldn't sleep, because my parents worked, they both had businesses, and I think they thought my brothers and sisters were at home with me a lot when they weren't.
Okay.
So I was pretty much allowed to do whatever I wanted, and often I would stay up late watching telly, and I'd also wake up really early in the night. And on the weekends, they had this show called Rage, which was music video clips. And from about 8 a.m. to 11 a.m., it would be all the top 40. But if you started watching at midnight, to 8 a.m. was where all the wild shit would happen. All the weird stuff from overseas, all like experimental video clips of dance music stuff. And I'd catch these snapshots of culture from all around the world. So I just remember seeing like weird homemade VHS rave videos from Birmingham in the UK and like cool American lo-fi punk videos and like just all this stuff. And back then, you know, it was like music video culture was really big, but also you didn't have to have a big budget to do this stuff. Some of them were very homemade and very like organic. And I just remember being like, wow, no one I know, like my brothers and sisters were all teenagers when I was a kid. So it was like I was very, obviously you look up to your brothers and sisters, and I looked up to mine, and they were always having parties in the house because my parents were never around. So I'm seeing teen culture from baby age. I'm seeing all their music going on. I'm analysing everything. My brothers both played instruments, and so did my dad, and we had a jam room. So like they'd bring their friends around, and they'd all play instruments and because I wanted to relate to them. They were older than me. So what I'd do was when they left the house, I would go through all their CD collections and I'd learn all the songs. I'd learn all the bands because I wanted to be involved. I wanted to be able to talk to them and their friends and like know what was up. So I would like casually learn all this stuff. And then when them and their friends are sitting around, I'd just like drop this knowledge about like
sit there and absorb it.
Exactly. And I'd sort of try and because, you know, I'd perk up every now and then and be like, shut up, Anna. That's not really, you know, I'd be like, oh, I've got to get better at this conversational stuff. And I'd like learn all the names of all the guitarists and all the drummers and who did what. And oh my gosh, that person produced that. And it was just this curiosity that started from pretty much being an ostracized younger child.
Well, it's funny you say that because, you know, if your parents weren't around as much and your older brothers and sisters were doing their own thing, a lot of times you would think that's a recipe for a kid to get into trouble. But it sounds like you were kind of just a good kid and making your own fun, and you managed to turn that early independence, if you want to call it that, into something really productive for you.
I guess
seemed
so.
Like
in hindsight,
I mean, I'm sure at the time you weren't thinking it, but
at the time I was like, why don't they like me?
right.
But
which is, I mean, let's be honest, that drives a lot of art.
Yeah, totally, exactly. You need that. You need to feel uncomfortable and a little out of place, and that idea of being an outsider is what makes most artists do what they do. So yeah, I'm perfectly able to see that now and like love it. And you know, and even at the time, I mean, I was honestly just such a little weird kid, you know. I really was. We sort of joke about it because like I was the kind of like I had a rabbit breeding. I've never talked about any of this, by the way. This is very funny.
Exclusive. This is great.
Here's an Anna Lunoe exclusive. I used to breed rabbits and sell them to my local pet shop. I can't claim the idea. It was actually my dad's idea. He did the same thing. We're a very entrepreneurial family. None of my family works for anybody. We all have our own weird businesses. That's all I know how to do. So anyway, my dad did this back in Denmark. He's Danish, and he used to tell me stories about how he'd breed the rabbits and sell them to all his friends and make heaps of money. So I started this rabbit hustle from the age of about 7. And I basically was supplying the whole of all the surrounding neighborhood pet shops with dwarf miniature rabbits from like the ages of 6 to like 12.
Okay, so let's break this down for a minute. So the pet stores were cool with just buying kind of random rabbits from a little girl?
Yeah, I mean, where do you think they get them?
I mean, yeah, I guess I never really thought about it before.
Right.
I guess in my mind, I would have assumed there was some kind of legitimate supply chain.
No, honestly, you could just go up and be like, hey, I've got some bunnies coming on I'd call around and be like, hi, my rabbits, I have miniature dwarf rabbits, and the mum's going to have a baby next week, so they'll be ready to deliver in like 2 months.
Yeah.
Do you want some rabbits? So you could get like $15 to $20, I think, or something like that, which when you're a little kid was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And to be honest, this wasn't just a job. I actually was obsessed and loved these rabbits more than anything in the whole world.
That was a job I would love to have had.
It was like my dream job. Honestly, by the time I was 8 or 9, I had my dream job. And I actually saved so much money doing this. I went to Europe on my own when I was 9 to go to my cousin's wedding, who I'd only met once.
That's amazing.
And it's so weird. But the whole way to there, I talked to every single person on the whole plane. I was a weird kid. I just go up to them and be like, hi, what's your name?
Right.
And do you know how to make origami? I had an origami book of going around the plane just making friends. And I had a camera and I took a picture of all my friends on the plane.
Oh, wow.
So I have a picture of all these random 35-year-old men and women who made origami with me on the plane. I've still got the photos. I'm like, oh, that was David.
Wow.
He made origami with me for 12 hours.
That's awesome, though. I mean, it sounds like, if your parents were both entrepreneurs, your whole family, everyone seems to be fairly independent, that seems like the best use of your time. Go on a trip, explore. It seems like you were built for it almost, in a way, that they set you up to be able to be successful doing what you're doing now almost.
It was some kind of training ground, I guess, when you think traveling on my own at young age. I don't know. I honestly didn't know being a DJ wasn't even in the realm of what I thought I'd do with my life. I didn't even know. I had no idea.
Well, yeah, at that age, I don't think anybody does.
No.
I mean, for you musically, other than what you were sort of sponging up from your siblings and all of that, was there anything, do you remember an early moment, a song or a video or an album that really kind of affected you in a different way, that maybe changed your brain about music, made you take it more seriously?
I remember the first time I heard Creep by TLC. Those early, I think it's a guitar stab. I actually went to the studio because one of my friends was dating Dallas Austin, who produced it for a long time. So I actually ended up going, when I was on tour with The Weeknd, I went to their studio in Atlanta and I went to the studio where he made Creep.
Wow.
And he was away, but his assistant took me and walked me through everything. And I met Waka Flocka that day, random fact.
Amazing.
But who was recording in another studio there. That's another good story. I wish I could tell it. That's another one for another day.
Yeah. We can go. I have a great meeting Waka Flocka story also.
Everyone does.
Once we turn this off, we can tell it. Yeah.
That's the thing about Waka, is that everyone has a great Waka story. He's the best
very
guy.
Charismatic guy.
He is really charismatic. So hearing that early, hearing that sound, I used to go to my CD store on the way home from school because my bus stopped there. So every day I'd go in, or every week I'd go in and listen to all the latest releases. Just obviously because I had nowhere else to be.
Right.
My parents weren't home, so I was like, I'll just kill some time.
Yeah, why not?
And the first time I heard the opening to Creep, I was mind blown.
It's one of my favorite TLC songs.
Yeah, it just and her voice and the darkness of it and the sexiness of it, I really had never heard anything like it. And another one was Doggy Style. What's my name?
Right. With that synth line.
With the synth line, Dr. Dre, obviously, and the video. I think the first time I saw it was on Rage, so with this TV show I was telling you about. So I saw the video first, and so seeing the dog, them all as him as a Doberman,
right,
and them all change, and it just opened up this, and seeing California, the punch, and that whole thing just blew my mind.
Yeah.
You got to understand, Australia is a beautiful country. There's beautiful natural resources in it, but we don't have that kind of culture. We don't have that kind of complex, layered society and architecture, and everything from how the garages look to how the streets are to the street signs. It all looked completely like another universe to where I was living, and that really stuck in my mind still to this day.
Yeah, that's got to be a special moment. I mean, I think about, now the differences between what we do for Australia and for America. It's not so different anymore. It translates pretty well. DJs travel back and forth all the time, and it seems like the scenes are pretty much
on par.
Yeah,
totally.
yeah.
Even since I moved here in 2012, that's totally changed. Every big DJ in Australia tours America just as regularly.
When did you first come to America?
I first came to America to DJ Or like as part of dance music, or like
well, let's do both. I mean, when did you first ever come here, and then when did you come here to DJ?
My parents brought me here when we used to go on quite big trips at Christmas, and I think we came here one year, I think when I was about 6.
Okay.
So I have early memories of doing. My mom was a fashion designer, so we used to go to like Melrose,
right,
and walk down and go. All the girls would be going shopping with my mom, and like that kind of flashy Melrose vibe was my first memories of America.
You know, for a first memory, that's not a bad one.
Oh, it was great.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
That'd be super
colorful,
fun.
just like the colorfulness of everything. And like in Australia, we all had the same clothes. I know it sounds so crazy, but we literally all shopped from the same 3 shops. So like to see a world of clothing and like a world of whatever.
Yeah.
It sounds a little, I mean, that's a little extreme, but in my little neighborhood, we all literally just shopped at the same 3 stores.
Yeah, no, it must be mind expanding, and you can explore and express yourself, or at least you think you can at the time, and yeah.
Yeah, it's just a new world.
And so for you, you know, growing up, getting past those first years where you're going to Europe by yourself and all of that, getting into high school years, teenage years, when did you start getting involved with music in any way beyond just a listener, a fan perspective?
I started going to raves when I was about 14 or 15. 15. I actually moved schools around that time, and I wanted to go. I was always really intrigued. There was like a dance party at a club. There was like an underage dance party, which some of my friends had gone to, that they were dating some guys from another school, and they were going to this dance party, and I was like, oh, I want to be in on. I just knew I wanted to be in on that. And then it took me a while to make it happen, because this is another weird tangent, but I was a competitive horse rider when I was a teenager.
Oh, wow, okay.
So I was spending all my weekends competing eventing, which is show jumping, cross country, dressage in one day.
Wow.
So we'd do I was training really heavily for that throughout my teen years.
Because you could spend a lot of time on that, right? I mean,
every single day after school I was riding. It's a long story, but basically our parents went bankrupt when I was 12. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm going into this. But basically I started living with friends from the age of 12, and I'd always grown up horse riding on our farm, but I was living with a family whose daughter was a really, really competitive horse rider.
Okay.
She was like going for the Olympics and stuff. She was really hardcore. And so I got this old horse that we'd gotten off the racetrack for free. And because she was going off to horse ride every day, I somehow convinced my poor parents, who were like feeling very guilty that they were giving their child to some other family to raise. I somehow convinced them to help me pay for the boarding of this horse. And I did have a little bit of money left over from the rabbit biz.
Right.
So I sort of was like, oh, I'll help pay for it. And they're like, okay, but they knew, of course, because they obviously had all the money. They're like, you have $5.
Right,
but I was like, I've got all my savings from the rabbit biz. They're like, you don't have any money. But I think they felt really guilty. So my mum, pulled the money together for me to have. I think about it now and I feel really it breaks my heart a bit that they were spending their money.
Of course.
But you know what though? I will say, so it was really full-on training, physically and mentally, and also very much physically. It's a very dangerous sport. So I was really faced with fear, actual fear on a daily basis because some of I broke my arm. I had a horse roll on top of me. I actually had a lot of physical confrontation.
Wow.
But the courage and the grit that I developed during those years horse riding, I attribute to anything that I've ever done in my life. So it was money well spent, not that they even knew it. It was incredible. It was like the training of my life doing that.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
But going back to dance music, so I was really into horse riding, and then I'm like, oh, but I want to go to these parties. And then I had to go to boarding school because with the families that I was living with, it was just I'd stayed with my 4 best friends.
Of course.
It was 2 girls that I stayed with for 3 or 4 years. And that was long enough for me to be in another person's home. And it was time for that. So they were like, okay, we've got to send Anna to boarding school. And I went to boarding school. Basically, that's when I started going to raves because I had to sell the horses then.
Right.
So I started going to raves when I went to to boarding school with some of the other kids that were at school, and like the avenue for me to do that was then. I just remember like the first night I went to a rave, it was a big rave. Like Sydney in the like late 90s, early 2000s had these really big raves, culture start, where it was like...
Well, yeah, because dance music was having kind of a little bubble around that time.
Yeah, definitely. There was like a lot of really popular... and like every kid got a Ministry of Sound CD for Christmas. You know, that was the go-to teenager Christmas present. So the first time I went to a rave, I just remember that all the other kids were like getting drugs and stuff, and I was really... a good kid. I honestly wasn't interested.
No, me too. I
just had no interest in it. And there was actually a really famous drug death in Australia at the time, and her name was Anna, who died, and her birthday was the same as mine.
Damn.
And I was like, that's creepy. I'm never doing that. Like, it was just too much of a coincidence.
Yeah, that's
and
a
like
lot.
I read the book that her parents wrote
about
her when I was like 13 on a train. I read it and I was like, I'm never doing drugs. So I wasn't interested in that side of it at all.
Right.
And like the whole night I just went crazy. Like I was running around this party and I had glitter all over my face, and I'm like literally the most lit person at the whole rave. And they were like, what? I remember the boys on the train on the way home being, just tell us, Anna, what did you take? Like, and I'm like, nothing, literally nothing. And I was like, at 8 a.m. I'm bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, because I'm just like high on life, and I knew my life was never going to be the same.
It's so funny you're describing my first rave
really?
To a T. Yeah.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, the exact same experience.
Just for me, it was the most invigorating, like dancing all night and finding that kind of place where you could go and just freak out.
Yeah.
It was so insane, right?
It was amazing. I think looking back, I think I have enough distance now. For me, I think maybe I was kind of a repressed kid a little bit, or just, not super emotional on the surface. And something about it, I think I was able to maybe connect to something a little deeper, a little emotional, and just let it all out. But yeah, at the time, I wasn't thinking about any of that.
Yeah.
I was just, that release, even just the music. I think people forget too that kind of music, it wasn't that accessible. Sometimes you had to go to the rave to hear it.
Yeah.
And so moving forward from there, if you start going to these raves around that age, getting involved with the scene a bit, was there a thought early on to be more involved than just going to the parties? Or did that come a little later?
I don't know if I was even thinking that far ahead.
Yeah.
There was a boy in my grade who was the DJ, and he collected vinyl, and he did graph, and he was DJ culture to me. And it was like every party we had, he would DJ.
Right.
And that was like... I thought that was his role,
Yeah,
like,
of
cool.
course. There's one.
There's one.
Yeah.
We only need one.
Right. He's pretty good.
He's great.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it. And I went about my business, and I left school, and I was like, what am I going to do? I really love music. I went into music journalism straight up. So I went straight to radio, a little community radio station in Sydney. Actually, no, I tried to go to university. I studied 1 year at university doing communications.
Right.
Trying to learn to be in some kind of media, because I thought I wanted to end up in music journalism of some kind.
Sure.
So, but then I found this radio station, and basically it had just opened, and I started working at reception. It was volunteer-based.
This is FBI?
Yeah. So FBI is now a really amazing beacon for arts and culture in Sydney. But at the time, it literally had just opened. So I heard whisperings of this new station, and it was on the other side of Sydney. I moved over there. I moved on the same street.
Oh, wow.
And I...
Intentionally?
Sort of intentionally. I knew when I left school, I just moved and on my own, just just changed my whole life a few times, and just because Sydney's small too. So I knew I was done with school, and I was done with that life, and that I knew that there was more that I wanted to experience. So I started just throwing myself into it a little bit. That world just felt really small, and I wanted to expand it. Yeah, and I started volunteering at this station, and that's where I met all my friends that got me into DJing. It was like when I started it as on reception, just answering the phones, and then I got an all-night show, so I'd get there at 2 a.m. and do the midnight graveyard shift till 6 a.m.
Paying your dues.
Oh, yeah. Are you kidding? Everyone's like, oh, your Apple job's so cool. I'm like, yeah, I did radio for free for 10 years. So
people forget, man. And that's something I love talking about on this show is, all of the grinding it takes to get to the point that we're at now, because I think people who may have just started listening to this music or started getting involved in the scene in the last, 3 years, 5 years, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just there's so much that goes into, there's like that old saying that it takes 10 years to make an overnight success.
Yeah. Yeah, and even like going back to the Diplo conversation, he took me and Nina Las Vegas on tour with him this year, and that was really cool for all three of us because we were like
full circle moment.
Full circle. Like we all started playing tiny little sidebars together 10 years ago. And that's why Diplo is such an interesting character on the scene right now, because there's a lot of not overnight successes in the game now because the channels are open.
Right.
Like the path to playing
you can blow
huge
up a
shows,
lot faster.
you can blow up a lot faster. That lane there is some express routes to that lane right now.
Right.
But those lanes, the end game did not exist 10 years ago.
Right.
So in like a lot of ways. So the idea that a DJ and then a producer could start out and 2 years later be headlining Hardfest or EDC, that's actually outrageous.
Right.
When you 10 years ago, that's an outrageous thought. So it's like that didn't exist, and that's why someone like Diplo is like so important, because he's still at the top of his game and he understands that path that was necessary to take, understands that grind so much. You know?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And you still see it with a guy like him. And he's not the only one. There
are
others.
Heaps, for sure.
But, people who still are actively involved and caring about the culture of it all, you know? Like he's the kind of guy who will go and headline Hardfest or whatever it is, but then later that night he'll go play at some bar for 100 people.
For sure.
Just because I think he, not only that's his roots, but he knows that's where the culture is being created.
Yeah,
you
for
know?
sure.
And I think that's another thing that maybe gets lost in this era of work for a year and go play some big festival, is that there's a lot of in-between steps that are kind of the actual gears that keep it all running.
Yeah, I agree. And also the idea that people need to, like, the dance music ecosystem is quite fragile.
Absolutely.
And to maintain its health, originality, unique aspects, creativity, it actually needs to grow at a certain pace, and certain things need to happen to bring up younger artists and to like keep the whole thing functioning in a healthy way.
Absolutely.
And the scene interesting and the stories interesting. So yeah, I think it's still really important that it's fed back into and that an artist brings up other artists they think is interesting, and don't just rely on the system to do that, because it won't always do it.
Absolutely.
The system's going to feed the loudest mouth, the biggest mouth, and the one that's going to sell the most tickets. It's not going to feed the most interesting music, the most unique stuff, the stuff that's going to push the culture forward.
Absolutely. And especially, so much money has come into dance music in the last 5 years that I think if all of us who are actively working in the industry don't pay attention, exactly like what you were just saying, and try to curate a little bit, that the pocketbook is always going to win if no one else is paying attention. For sure.
That's why I find, like, even on my show, I take that very seriously. My role in finding the stuff that that doesn't have the biggest PR budget.
Right.
That's my job. And that's what I try and do to the best of my possible ability in the time frame that I have.
And that absolutely comes through. And it's something about your show that I've always appreciated, is you can really tell that you're very actively involved. You're listening to everything, which, I know as well as you, it takes forever and you don't always want to do it. But no, I've always appreciated it, because there are plenty of DJs with radio shows who have no involvement with their own show.
For sure.
Speaking of radio shows, how did you evolve from being the receptionist to, kind of going on to have a fairly long career with FBI?
Yeah, I think it was like 6 or 7 years that I did a show on FBI just for the love of it. And that was some of the most formative years of my life in all things, like, gosh, I obviously started DJing and touring around, but I also interviewed some of the most amazing artists that existed at the time. And I, really found my voice with dance music, and I, learnt everything about everything I could possibly get my hands on.
sure.
It was like a training ground, it's better than
Yeah.
any university degree I could have gotten. And I still contribute to the station financially, and every time I go back to Sydney, because that's the thing. I wouldn't have this job, honestly. I wouldn't have the job at Apple unless that place had trained me.
Right.
I literally did radio training there. So I will be paying sponsorship for that station till I die.
Absolutely.
Because that's how you do it. You give back to what helped you.
Absolutely. Did you start DJing outside of radio during that time?
Of course, yeah. So when you start doing a show, we'd get they'd send an email around like, oh, this art space is having an opening. They're looking for someone to play some music on Friday night. It's going to be 2 hours for $50.
Yep.
Who's in? And I'd be like, 2 hours for $50? Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Me. So that's how I started like playing, little shows and stuff. And I just was like, I'm going to learn how to use that equipment. I'm going to learn how to mix them together. I'm going to learn how to, and I just did it one step at a time. And then I was like, once I started doing a gig, a week, then I got a residency in a restaurant bar and I played there every night for 4 hours every night. And the guys in the kitchens would just bring me profiteroles and like snacks, like antipasta plates. It was an Italian restaurant.
Right.
I got so fat, really. I just ate like antipasta and like imagine your dream
amazing.
job DJing and eating profiteroles.
That sounds amazing.
All fucking night.
I would
had
like
it
that
made.
job right now.
Yeah, it's a great job. But it also really taught me how to, it was a bar restaurant, so like I'd get people dancing by 11 p.m.
Right.
And it was like trying to hold on to the dance floor till 1, you know what I mean? It
those
was like
training grounds. I mean, I think
my
that's a
God.
theme of this whole conversation, but I think those are so important. I had very similar early gigs, those long sets for people who didn't know or care who you were. And you just kind of had to really work your ass off to make anybody
Give a
interested.
shit.
Yeah. And I think those skills, at least for me, they made me such a better DJ, now.
100%.
Yeah, because the game's changed so much now and people are producers first, right?
Yeah.
And then they sort of figure out how to DJ later. And again, nothing wrong with that, but it's one of the few like old guy advantages I think we have left.
True.
is
True.
That,
Oh my God.
The live show, I never worry about that because I went through those years.
Absolutely. And, I still get nervous sometimes and I have
Right.
to give myself a little talking to, like, Anna, if you can't do this with the experience, like with the many times, like if you can't do this, kind of no one else probably can because
Right.
you're the oldest and like the most experienced in a way, kind of. So it's like you kind of, and I mean that in a very like self-deprecating
Of
way,
course.
that if you can't do it now, you're probably never going to be able to
Right,
do it because
right.
no one has had more hours on the job than you. So like,
Absolutely.
get it together, girlfriend. But even like I remember, you talk about the world changing and the DJ industry changing. Like I remember one of my friends who's kind of famous now, actually. He's like if you watch the Bondi Hipsters, he's one of the Bondi Hipsters.
Okay.
He's like, and he's got a TV show. He's kind of like this internet personality. He's Trent from Punchy. He's like, his name's Nick. And we went to school together and like have been friends forever. And he came to the show, like came to the bar one night
Right.
and was like, Lunoe, you're fucking great at this. You can DJ all over the world. And I was literally like, I looked at him, I was like, this guy's fucking mental. What's he talking about? I can DJ all over the world.
Because
like,
you couldn't even conceive at the
I
time,
couldn't,
right?
Oh my God, Willy, my wildest dream was that one day I would DJ at the casino. I was like, wow, the casino's so flashy.
Right.
Maybe one day they'll book me to
Right.
play at the casino. Like that was my wildest dream.
Well, and but I love hearing that because those were the times we were living in. You were saying before how there just wouldn't be a thought of, one day I'll
Oh my
headline
God.
a festival.
That's
It
ridiculous.
just didn't even
It
really
didn't even exist.
And I think about now, there is kind of a roadmap for somebody just starting off. They can kind of see this is the peak.
I want to play Hardfest. I want to
Right.
like play Madison Square Garden.
Right, yeah, God.
Like when I interviewed Lewis the Child and I was like, I literally was thinking about the questions I was going to ask them and I was like, to them, like they've blown up so quick.
Yeah.
To them, their goal is probably to play Madison Square Garden.
Right, absolutely. And
Like-
and it's funny that, that's maybe not even the craziest
It's not even
goal.
crazy. Like
Yeah.
they could absolutely. Like it's wild what's achievable and it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you, this is a complete sidebar, but when you're gearing up to interview somebody, do you like to know a lot beforehand? Do you come in with a lot of questions?
Yeah, I do, because I do whenever I have time, but honestly, sometimes I have to give myself time limits on everything now.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I literally end up having panic attacks.
Of course.
5 times a day. But I absolutely do as much research as I can, because I've been an interviewer for a long time, and I've also been an artist for a long time and had a lot of interviews done. And although a lot of these people are my friends, and I can have a very casual conversation with them, I do think it's important just to really understand, as much as I can about them. But sometimes I do my best.
I do the same. I'm always just wondering, because you're the pro here for once. Usually I'm sure you have the same experience that a lot of DJs aren't used to talking.
and sometimes they'll come in and we'll be like, yeah, chatty. And then I'll put the mic on and they're like, hello, Anna.
Exactly.
And I'm like, dude, what?
Where'd you go?
And then that's even harder for them to get, because I feel like some artists have a voice that they speak in when they're talking to journalists.
Yes.
And I kind of kerfuddle their whole shtick, because they're like, okay, it's Anna, she's my friend, but I'm on the radio, and I get a bit confused.
That's our advantage. I do the exact same thing. But so getting back to the DJing, you're starting to play out locally.
Yeah.
When did you start getting involved with Ministry of Sound and kind of operating, as more of a known figure, a known name in the scene?
That's what it feels like that was ages into my career, but in reality it was only like 3 years in. So I was like, my rise in Sydney, in our little micro community, was really quick, perceivably,
Right.
But that was, I was still learning how to make music. In those days, it was like you could be really like the biggest DJ in Australia was Ajax, and he didn't even make his own music. He was just like the best DJ.
Right.
So I wasn't even trying to properly make music till 2009 or 10. I learnt in 2007 and started making edits and but I didn't make proper. I was actually writing songs from the very jump, but the songs that I wrote, it was always really conflicted, because the songs that I was writing and that what naturally came out of me were much more songs. And I've always said that I should have honestly been just done band stuff. My path was never meant to go the way that it did musically.
Interesting.
And it meant for some pretty confused years musically in terms of the music that I was making. And I had these 2 art forms going side by side in my head, where I had the DJing art form, which I fucking loved. And I honestly put so much energy into it and was so fulfilled by that I wasn't that concerned about the music making aspect not kind of falling into place, because this other art form that I was working on, I was really thriving in.
And you didn't have to make music.
You didn't
back
have
in those
to.
days.
No,
that's another
that's
change.
Huge change. Now it's inconceivable. That someone could be a big DJ and not make their own music in a way. But that's the way it was,
Yeah.
And I was absolutely making my own music, but it just wasn't quite electronic music that was fitting into that realm. So I sort of started refining that idea over the few years that I was in Australia, and got involved with Ministry of Sound in 2010. And that felt like a huge jump in my career at the time.
Well, they were a huge name. I mean, they were like the name for dance music.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, it really was a big deal. And I was always an outsider artist. So for me, it felt a little bit weird that this mainstream business was trying to get involved with me.
Right.
Because I always felt like I was the alternative to that.
Right.
But to be fair, they had it was a 2 CD compilation, and they had Axwell doing one, and then they'd have a weird side room mix, which was what I was doing. So they weren't trying to make me be anything I wasn't.
Right.
And it was a great experience, because I was going from playing these little dive bar kind of cool indie clubs with all the cool kids to having to play on big stages with crazy LED lights and stuff. And it was a big jump in the way that I played, and I learnt how to play all different kinds of music to bigger crowds and in big rooms, and how,
And all those compilations did fairly well.
Yeah, they
right?
sold gold in Australia. They do a lot of business. It's like I said before, every kid used to get a Ministry of Sound CD for Christmas from their family, from their uncle, their cool uncle or something. It was I'm going to get them a CD. So it was a good thing for me, for sure. And it meant that I was suddenly a part of the bigger dance music industry, and not just an outsider. much.
And it seemed like the dance scene in Australia then was having a moment a little bit with, you and Flume and a bunch of other people kind of coming up around the same time.
Oh, the
right?
time's a bit different. So from 2007 to 2010, Modular ruled Australia in the coolest sense. Like Modular was like cut copy, presets, avalanches, Midnight Juggernauts, Muscles, all these guys that like, and I was in a band on Modular and I was signed to Modular.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was in the Bumblebees. I was their DJ. And then I was DJing on my own as well, and they booked me, Modular did. And so then at around 2010, so I was like this, like from this cool kid sort of sidebar world, and then I sort of went into the mainstream dance music world with the Ministry of Sound stuff for a few years. And then it was sort of Flume. I got involved with Flume in 2011. Right. Our song came out in 2012.
Right, yeah, I was skipping ahead there.
Yeah, so he kind of flipped. He broke almost single-handedly broke that mainstream scene because everything was like 130 BPM, 126 BPM, super electro. It got bigger and bigger and bigger, Swedish House Mafia, blah, blah, blah. It became like massive mainstream, David Guetta, that whole EDM into pop music
when
thing happened.
Just starting.
And then that sort of that went into all the clubs, obviously, because there was suddenly this like, it was suddenly very popular for every kid to go to a club and hear David Guetta records. So then, and then all the DJs were like, oh shit, okay, that's what they want to hear now. And there was like, it sort of got to a point, we all put up with it for as much as we could and sort of found our own middle ground with it until it broke. And really, Flume came along playing 80 BPM kind of weird broken records, which at the time was such a departure from the 130 BPM big room stuff that it almost like snapped the whole scene in half because these clubs that were built for big room, suddenly the only person who could fill the rooms was Flume and he was playing 80 BPM stuff. So it was like, and everyone was sort of scratching their heads a little bit like, what do we do now? And literally clubs went out of business. So, and like he would want to play the weird hall that has like the cool vibe, not like this mainstream club with a big dragon shooting smoke out its mouth, which is not, I'm not exaggerating. There's a club in Brisbane that has that has like literal cages for dancers and like a big dragon that when the smoke machine goes off comes out and shoots smoke over the crowd. Brilliant. Like that's not the vibe for a Flume show. No. So yeah, everything changed. And it was kind of incredible that like within 2 years, so we did our track together before he really blew up. It was like one of the first big tracks that was one of the first songs that he released, the second song he released, I think.
And had you moved to America at this point? No. Or was that about to happen?
Actually, that was around the time that I moved.
Okay.
So when I moved here, like I always say, I moved in a pre-Flume environment. And what I mean by that is, before that, the booking agents in Australia and America did not talk.
Right.
So like when I moved here, I was like, hey, I DJ heaps in Australia. Like I do heaps of stuff. I play lots of big shows here, but no one cared because they're like, we don't know you. We don't know what you do there. And it's like there wasn't that communication. Yeah. Whereas, so what happened with Flume was, so my booking agent in America signed Flume as well because I was like, oh, we just did this song together. Meet this guy. His name's Latney. He's Windish. And he's like, should I sign this Flume guy? I'm like, yeah, he's great. And then, of course, Flume went on to be like huge here. And that combined with a few other people like that came over around that time, it made America really take notice of Australia and be like, shit, who's the next big thing from Australia that we can think? And so that sort of that pathway became really solid. I'm not taking credit for it at all but it happens by like a few things happening. That's how these things change.
Of course.
So so now it's like a post-Flume transition where like every big artist in Australia can really tour America because those paths are really solid now.
Absolutely. And I mean, I give you some credit. I think you're absolutely part of that movement. And that had to have been, sort of a scary time of transition to go from, a very established presence in the Australian scene coming over here and kind of having to reset and refigure out sort of how everything worked again.
It was pretty like looking in hindsight, it was really dumb the way that I did it. I literally just left because I was bored and I felt like I knew that there was more out there and I knew that I wanted to do more. Did you feel like
you were hitting a glass ceiling?
Yeah, I felt like I'd played every club 10 times, 100 times. I'd played every festival 100 times. There's only so many times because the festivals in those days booked all internationals and then like 4 Australian acts that would do the whole tour. And I'd done every tour like 4 times. It was like I knew I was pushing my luck and that like they can't book me forever. Someone else has to have a go.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like I have to keep, and I'm sick of doing it too. I'm sick of playing the 2 p.m. opening slot on a side stage because that's the only slot they get. You know what I mean? I was like, I've done that 100 times and I know that I'm capable of more and I really want to go and flex it a bit and see what I'm capable of. So I left Australia and I came here with no book, like with no plan at all. No, like I started working with Lunoe, who was not even working at Windish at the time. He was just like he was booking me at his Gmail account because he's like, you're great, I'm going to help you. But like he started working at Windish shortly after I moved here, I think. Right. And like it was sort of this weird time where I just knew that I wanted to change. And that's actually really common for Australians to move overseas. Growing up, a lot of Australians moved to the UK actually, just for fun. Right. And it was like, oh, I'm just going to move and just like change my life and see what happens. And so I did that. And honestly, it was really, really hard. And I look back and I don't know how I did it, but I didn't care, Willy, because I just was so happy. I didn't care that I was completely broke and like barely making ends meet for 2 years because it just felt so exciting. Right. Suddenly it was like I took nothing for granted. And every show I got was like, oh my gosh, they want to book me at this thing, you know?
Right. I think there's something to be said for having a successful experience and then having to sort of take a step back for whatever reason. Not only do you appreciate what you get more, but I think you're able to kind of maybe reset your own expectations for your career and think, okay, so I had these experiences. How can I learn from this to kind of really focus on what I want to do and really make this something sustainable in a new environment? I mean, I think I met you around when...
Yeah, we did. We met straight when I moved here.
Yeah. And I remember I went over to the place you were living at the time. We wrote like half a song that never came out.
Which is still fire. I actually heard it the other day.
That's weird. I literally, and before I even knew I was coming to talk to you, I was just going through old stuff. And I was like, oh, this is not bad.
I know, my poor computer with a million half-mates on it.
Yeah, same. But no, and I saw you, and I could tell even then, I was like, you were on your grind. You were very determined. You had, if not a plan, you had, kind of one foot in front of the other goals. And it just seemed like you were going to get there, even if you didn't know how yet. That was always my impression.
Oh, that's nice to say. Thanks. I'm glad you saw that. My mum just walked in the room and all she could, I remember, she'd just be like, what are you doing? How are you going to do this? What are you thinking? So I'm glad that you at least could see that.
I had similar conversations with my mom, it's only fair. I think parents, if a parent is worried about you being in the music industry, I think that's probably a good parent.
If Willa, if you're listening, you absolutely cannot go into music. No. I don't know how I'm going to handle it as having a kid now with going, it's like letting her do whatever she wants. Because you do just have to trust your journey too. Like your parents can try to understand and know what you're doing, but you just have to know, you sort of go with your own gut and you have to follow it.
And I think, maybe mom can weigh in, but, I think all you can really do is be a good example, right? I think that's the strongest thing you can do for a kid. I think if you try to force your kid to do something, if you try to really direct it, they're going to go the other way. Yeah. And so, you be a good person. You set a good example. And that's what my parents did for the most part. And, I'm happy to be like them, So,
for sure.
Yeah.
I think there's no way to know what your kids are going to like, you know? Like everyone's always like, oh my gosh, she's going to love music. She's going to love this. I'm like, she might hate everything. She might think I'm the biggest, most annoying. Like she's like, oh, my mom, the DJ.
I think that's pretty common.
Yeah, that's fine too. She can do whatever she wants.
Absolutely. And have you, of course, we're skipping ahead now, but just because we're talking about it, first of all, congratulations. I haven't seen you since the baby was born.
Yeah.
And how is that going? I'm sure it's still just early days and crazy all the time, but have you sort of figured out, or do you at least have intentions for sort of how you can manage your time even more than it was managed before? Because obviously you were busy before you had a baby, and just how to balance all of that.
Yeah, I mean, every month it changes because when they're this age, so she's 6 months now, and every month she changes completely. So there's a lot of like dancing around her new routine and her new kind of what she needs and what she's, how much food she needs, what she can do, whether she'll take this food or that food. So it's like managing how much I, need to do for her is like a constant, moving puzzle piece. But we're getting there, and she's an amazingly independent and good kid, good baby. I think compared to from what I can hear, she's really easy. I've been really lucky with her so far. Touch wood. So it's going really well in the sense we're finding a balance, and it's been really amazing actually. And it's sort of, even though it's only been 6 months, it's one of those things where you just find it hard to even imagine that they weren't around before, even though it's only been such a short time.
Yeah. When I remember, when you publicly announced that you were pregnant and you were still performing at the time and, you were playing these big shows, visibly pregnant. I thought, well, no, I guess that sounds funny to say, but to me, I thought that was the coolest thing. I think, I don't know, there's a weird culture of dance music that I think just the image of a pregnant woman playing on a big stage, I think
oh my God.
I think it was important. I don't know. I think
it was cool too. I honestly think it was cool too. I had a feeling that I would be pregnant when I played Coachella. I just sort of knew. It was weird. Even though I wasn't really trying to get pregnant or anything, when I got booked, because you get booked like 6 months ahead, and I had this weird daydream that it would be that way. I don't know why. I often have little daydreams about things that end up happening. It's weird. But it was, oh my gosh, when I got really pregnant, honestly, like I sometimes would think, this must look really strange for people. But all I can do is my muscle memory and my physical, the way that I DJ has been the same for 10 years.
Right.
And it's like, I didn't take any notice of the belly when I was playing, and I just had to just go with it. And so every now and then I'd be like, this must look so crazy, but I just didn't care.
Right.
I can't tell you really, I just didn't care.
No, and nor should you. I thought it was important. I thought it was a great moment for dance music. Like I'm concerned with, as I think a lot of people are, sort of with the changing culture of EDM and the money coming in and everything getting bigger and bigger, there is sort of this, less desirable part of the culture coming in with sort of this hyper masculinity and I don't know, just like we were talking about curating music and artists earlier, I feel like we also have a responsibility to curate the culture to a certain extent, or to try to at least set a good example as much as we can. And just, I thought that was great, an image that, people might not have otherwise seen,
For sure.
There's a million, I'm just getting on a soapbox now, but there's a million dude DJs with babies that DJ all the time, and nobody thinks about it.
That's funny, actually, you say that. When I announced I was pregnant, I did Coachella that day. I announced the day before I played Coachella, but I had press at Coachella that day. So I went in the day that I announced, and I went on Sirius, and I was talking to Geronimo, and he was like, I've never spoken to a pregnant DJ before. And I was like, Geronimo, do you know how many guys you interview that have kids?
Right.
I was like, they all have kids.
Yeah.
I'm just making one
right
now, but they have the luxury of not telling you about it.
Yes.
I don't have that luxury.
Absolutely.
And that's it. And he was like, I could see him being like, you're so right.
Yeah. It's just those little conversations.
Yeah, it was wild. It was really cool. And I could see him just being like, yeah, totally. But it's just like those little moments where people are like, oh, you just don't have, I just didn't have a choice but to share it. I'm still struggling with how public I want my experience to be with her. And I don't, I'm quite private about my life. I don't like to share too much about my family or anything, but just because I it's so
Of course. No, that's completely understandable.
It's just my life. It's like two separate parts of me, and I don't always want to share them, but she's wonderful. She's really cool.
Good. We'll wrap up in a couple minutes here, but I just want to make sure we cover, because we sort of skipped the fun part of all of these cool things that have happened to you in the last few years. So you were in LA and grinding away, working hard, working your ass off. And at a certain point, at least from an outsider's perspective, it seemed like everything started picking up steam. I mean, you were putting out release after release. You collaborated with a lot of, amazing people who have gone on to do great things, worked with a lot of different labels. who have also all gone on to do great things. It seemed like you surrounded yourself with a good team, a good group of people. And at a certain point, did it ever feel like there was a critical mass? Like it was really starting to pick up? Was there a moment?
There was so it felt like for about a year, it felt like, all right, this has got to happen soon. Because I felt like I was doing really solid stuff, and every show, it felt like the groundswell was there, but I didn't feel like I was getting the reaction from the business end that I needed, and it felt really frustrating. There was a year or two where I'd grinded for like 3 or 4 years, and I was so exhausted, and I was still barely making ends meet. And
I've been there. It's a rough moment.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, is this ever going to happen? Like, is this just too much of a machine where you've just got to be plugged into this machine and I'm not plugged in the right way?
Right. Too much of an outsider.
Yeah. I just was like, I can see now where the clicks are, and I'm not really in these clicks. And like, it was really tricky. But at the same time, there was so much promise because the energy from the people and the clubs, and like, I could see that there was something very real happening, but it just wasn't translating.
Right.
But then at some point it did, and there was a few little moments that honestly helped click that into place. I always say this, it's just out of your control too. Like, you can be the best.
Yeah.
You can be so great and you can release such good music, and sometimes there's things that are out of your control, and suddenly the right person sees you
at the right
time, and they need you, and it clicks in, and that's so fucking unfair.
Absolutely.
That you can be that, like, that part of it really upsets me, that at some point it is out of your hands.
Yeah, it's true, and it's the most frustrating part of what we do, I think.
Yeah, and it does just take the right people to believe in you at a certain point.
Right.
And that's why I always say that, because there are so many people I know who are just unbelievably talented, and they deserve it, and it doesn't always happen for them, and I fucking hate it.
Of course.
And I'll do everything I can to support them and everything I can to build them up, and because I keep believing in them.
Absolutely.
And they should believe in themselves because they're brilliant. But the nature of this world is that at some point you've got to get lucky.
Yep, absolutely true. It's, hard work and luck, it's a very thin line. You can work as hard as you want, but if you don't hit that spark, sometimes it can be rough.
Yeah.
On that note, it seems like at a certain point, the right person, being Zane Lowe, noticed what you were doing and reached out to you. How did that come about, getting the Apple show?
So the story I now know. So all I know is that one day I used to get Twitter notifications an email when on Twitter if someone who was verified followed me.
Right.
And so I got an email. I was on a plane back from New York, and I got an email saying Zane Lowe's followed you on Twitter. And I was like, that's weird. And then I got an email saying, from a mutual friend of ours, apparently, who knew him. He's like, Zane's trying to get in touch with you about something. And I was like, what?
Right.
At this stage, Beats didn't exist.
Right.
Beats Radio, Beats One didn't exist. So I had no idea what he was talking about. And I then found out that that's what happened. And what had actually happened is he had seen a mix of mine online. I think it was my fader mix, I think. It was like a mix that I'd done. And during a time that was kind of a real grind. And when I used to make a mixtape, I would spend a week on it. And
Right.
I'd really make it, try and find the best music and make it as interesting as I possibly could.
Yeah, those were crafted back in the day. Very crafted.
Yeah. And I still have that mentality when I make a mix, that it's like I am, to the most, as I say, I always work within a time frame because I have to give limits, but like if I had the time, I'd spend 4 days and make the best mix I could. And I'd made it really good, and I was a bit bummed because I'd given it, there was also that thing where every blog was just like, hey, make us a mix. It's like, I don't have 4 days to make your mix. But they'd do, because they just wanted the content too. They just wanted to be like, oh yeah, we'll post it. It's like, okay, but that's 4 days work for me, and you're just going to post it, and
right.
And you have less SoundCloud followers than me.
Right.
So it's like
just off into the ether.
Off into the ether of, okay, cool. But that's the only way I'm going to get in with you guys. So, okay, fine, I'll do it.
Right.
And so I'd done it. And I think I was a little bit bummed because I'd seen that it only had X amount of plays. And I was like, oh, fuck, I spent so long on that mix.
Yeah.
And then I think that's actually where he heard my mix. And then I'd mentioned in the interview, or that he'd then been like, he's told me that he had like a short list of people that he was looking at, and then he heard the mix and he looked into me, and like, I don't think he was that familiar with me before.
Sure.
He premiered my track with Teed, I remember a year before that. So I think he was vaguely aware of me, but not
Right.
really across me that much until he started really looking in for hosts. And he saw in an interview that I did where I talked about doing radio on the
Right.
station and all the years that I spent in community radio. And he was like, And I think the penny dropped for him when he heard that I'd, spent so long in community radio and that my
Right.
heart was really there.
It's another full circle moment.
Exactly. Yeah. And you don't know why you do these things
Right.
when you do them, but you just keep going and you live with doing what you love. Then eventually, hopefully, that someone notices that can help you on your path.
Exactly. But I mean, I think where you are and what you're doing now is proof that, following your passion and just, following what you love to do usually is the best course of action. you
Well,
know?
it's the only happy course of action.
Right.
Because if you don't do what you love, then you always wonder what if you did what you love. So really, there's no
Absolutely.
choice to it.
Absolutely. And then you look at people who kind of clearly are being a little more calculating with it. And even if it is what they want to do, it's just like, I don't know. If you're not just following the passion and following the fun of it, maybe you'll make some money for a little while, but I don't see, when you see those calculations going on, to me, that doesn't spell long-term success.
I will say that, like, over the years, I can't tell you how many times I've been bumped down a lineup by some new hot thing who's gotten X amount of blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
And, like, we've fought it, like, wait, no, like, they're like, this is ridiculous. And they'd be like, sorry, there's a new dude in town who's
Right.
gotten a billion SoundCloud plays and
Yeah.
you're out, or like you're down the lineup. And I'd be like, what? This sucks. And then, like, I look back and I'm like, oh my God, remember that guy they bumped me
Right.
off the
What
lineup
happened to
for?
that guy? Yeah.
What happened to him? And one day someone will say that about me. And that, my friends, is the dance music industry.
There, but for the grace of God. Yeah.
And that's okay too, Willy.
Yes.
We can't all stay in the same place forever.
Absolutely. No, that's absolutely right. I think about what we'll be doing 10 years from now. We were talking about what we were doing 10 years before now. And, some of our friends will probably still be DJing. Some of us will still be DJing. Some
Yeah.
of us won't.
I'll probably be back at the Blue Room playing for profiteroles.
God, can I come? That sounds
Yeah,
amazing.
you can come. I got your hook up, bro.
Yes.
And that's probably fine. Willa will probably be in school being like, oh, my mom's playing some like bar tonight.
She's over at the restaurant
Again. She's huge these days. Mom, stop eating the profiterole.
But no, this has been really fun. It's good that we don't see each other that much.
Yeah.
But every time I see something you're doing, it makes me happy, and I always love what you're doing, and really looking forward to what's coming next, which I guess
We didn't even talk about.
I should say just for 5 seconds. What do you have going on? What should people be looking at?
I can't believe we haven't talked about this. I actually, Willy, I'm about to kind of break everything.
Okay. That sounds good. That's what we've been talking about this whole time. You got to do that
Yeah.
every once in a while, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of all I want to say.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm definitely going to keep doing myself in a lot of ways, but I'm also adding in some curveballs.
Good.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a time for that. It's a time of change.
Yes,
For
absolutely.
sure. We need some change
Absolutely.
around here.
The industry needs it. The music needs it. Yeah, we all need it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I'll look forward to that. I'm sure everyone
We can do a
listening
whole
will
other
too.
podcast about
We'll
that.
do
To be
part
honest,
two.
I took a deep breath and I was like, should I give Willy where I'm at? And I'm like, we don't have the time. I'm going to save him the editing and I'm just going to hold it
We'll
in.
do part 2 next time.
For sure.
Thank you so much. This has been really fun.
My pleasure. And congrats and big up what you're doing. It's so nice to have someone really diving in and doing really interesting conversations with people who don't always get the chance to have them. And I've noticed a lot of people really appreciating it and tweeting about it. And
Absolutely.
it's really cool that you're doing this.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been fun. Well, I'll get some interviewing tips once we stop recording.
All right.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. All right, that's the show. Shout out to Anna. I had so much fun sitting down with you for this. I'm really glad we finally linked up to record it. For everybody listening at home, whether you're at the gym, whether you're on your way to work, whether you're on your lunch break, whether you're at home, just ignoring everybody and listening to me instead. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to check out Anna's new single, Blaze of Glory, out right now. The link to that, all of her tour dates, her radio show, everything is in the description of this episode. My name is Willy Joy. You can email me at backtobackpod@gmail.com, or if you want to hit me up on social media, it's just at backtobackpod or at Willy Joy on everything. That's it for this week. I'll see you guys next Tuesday. Until then, this is Willy for Back to Back. Peace.